of the very first memory of your life. Do you have it? For you, I hope it's something wonderful like cuddling with your favorite fuzzy animal. Now let's compare that to the very first memory of my life. I was no more than 3 years old. My oldest brother, Rod, who loved me very much, my oldest brother, Rod, who loved to terrorize me very much, one night he said, "You know, there's a scary monster that lives inside the hamper in your room." Of course, I replied, "There is not." "Yes, there is. And tonight, when you're sleeping, that scary monster is going to climb out of the hamper, slither across the room, and eat you." Aren't brothers great? Well, I was 3 years old. I wanted to prove I was fearless. So when the house was dark, I climbed out of bed and I slowly opened the lid. I knew it. There's no monster in there. But just to be safe, I decided to move some of the clothes out of the way and look deeper inside. As I did that, the static electricity from me moving the clothes caused a snapping and popping sound. I saw bright white flashes of light. "It's the monster! Don't eat me!" I ran out of the room as fast as I could, screaming, "Mommy!" Welcome to the very first memory of my life. It turns out, in spite of their smell, my dirty clothes aren't actually a monster. However, fear is. And my fear monster followed me most of my life. Growing up, I learned firsthand that real monsters can live in your house. That lesson came courtesy of my father, who ran from his own monsters by drinking. During those times, he would spew such things as, "Hey, stupid!" or, "Oh, what's the matter, sissy boy?" I often wondered if I would ever be good enough for him to love me. That fear followed me into grade school, where I was a shy kid, afraid I wasn't good enough for the other kids to like me either. All through school, I struggled. My grades weren't great. That's why in high school, I became afraid that I wasn't smart enough to do well in college, so I didn't even go, which was okay, until a few years later when I unexpectedly found myself working for a very successful company. That job helped my fear monster cling to me like a heavy, dark shadow. That's because everyone I worked with had bachelor's degrees or master's degrees. They seemed like they had business all figured out. I had never even gone to college. I felt like an imposter. For over a decade, I told myself, "You're not good enough to work here. You're not smart enough to keep up." To compensate for the fear, I took on every extra project I could, which just meant that most of my days and nights were filled with stress as I frantically prepared for the next day. And as you would expect, my family bore the brunt of that stress. And true to form, it just made me afraid that I would never be good enough as a husband, a father, a son. This shadow of fear grew darker and darker until 4 years ago, when I chose to follow in my father's footsteps. I ran from my monsters by making bad choices that brought me to within days of destroying my marriage. Monsters are real, and they can live in your house. If I didn't overcome my fear, I would lose everything important to me. I didn't know where to start, so I turned to books for help. And fortunately, I soon found a book called The Power of Gratitude by Gordon Ferguson. And that book taught me that gratitude and fear cannot exist at the same time. And when I learned that, I decided that if I could do something as small as start and end each of my days focused only on what I was most grateful for, that over time, perhaps that would teach me how to amplify my many strengths instead of caring about my perceived weaknesses. And it worked. That small daily practice helped my confidence start to build. And now, just a few years later, by living with confidence, my relationship with my wife is the best that it's been in over 20 years. I'm even reconnecting with my father, and last fall, I left that corporate job and started my own business built on confidence. My friends, I ask you, do you have fear monsters living in your house? For far too long, I let my monsters control me. It all started with the scary monster in this hamper. The scary monster in this hamper. It turns out that if you can overcome your fears, most of the time, those things that you thought were monsters, they were never really monsters at all.